Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Death, Murder, and Mayhem podcast. I am your host, Liliana Stargazer, and today I will be covering my very first cult. Since this is the first time I'm covering a cult on this podcast, I thought I'd go ahead and cover the very first cult I was actually exposed to. Not as in, like, face-to-face, but more like we walked outside and found a flyer for it. I am from Arkansas, in the very area they deal with when it comes to this cult. I saw the newsreel about them when I was younger. Also, for this episode, I will have a first-hand information gathered through personal experience and interviews, as well as a single website that had every news article on it. It's only when I began on this episode I actually found out a person I work with was not just in the cult, but her sister was on a documentary about it as one of his former wives. Not only that, I found a website, TonyAlamoNews.com. And I thought it was his cult keeping up with news and whatnot. No. I don't know who made this site or how Tony hurt them or someone they love, but I do know it has every flyer, news article, court transcript, voice recording, anything you could imagine is there involving Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation. It is all scanned in or otherwise from the 1970 start to 2017, and a mention of the book release in 2022. And yes, I use this source for all my Tony Alamo Christian Foundation information. So, let's dig in. First off, we should probably define a cult versus just a normal religion. A cult versus religion is simply if they are way out there with extremist beliefs, they are a cult. Otherwise, just a religion. Most of the time, we use it for religions that have a more sinister or even illegal edge to them. So how does one actually begin a cult? It's actually stupidly easy. Find a vulnerable group. Tell them you have an answer to their problems. Tell them to bring their friends. At first, have relatively loose control. Then take over completely, one step at a time. Again, there's more to each and every step, but we'll get there. Let's begin with the leaders and their history. We will begin today with Susan Alamo, who was not named Susan Alamo at her birth. She is Edith Horn from Alma, Arkansas. Yep, I have not only been to Alma, I went to school in Alma. Yay, connections. Anyway, she was married twice and had a daughter. She'd use her daughter, named Chris, in cons. The con was that this adorable child and her mother would come by a church and testify with false testimonies. And the child would sing with an angelic voice. See, Chris could sing perfectly, and her mom knew just what to say, and how to say it, and to whom. They'd ask for the tithe plate to be passed around for them, and they'd hit 2 or 3 churches per day. And generally would make about $100 or more per church, and that's not even modern time money. That is way more spending power back then. They could probably only do this also on Sunday, Saturday, and Wednesdays, do those being church days. Saturday is Seventh-day Advent. Eventually, Edith decided that she wanted more. So she went to Hollywood to seek fame for herself or her daughter. It's up for debate which one. Now, let's go ahead and switch over to Tony Alamo. Again, this is not his name at birth. He is Bernie Hoffman. His family was Jewish and living in Joplin, Missouri. At the age of 9, he got abandoned at the Father Flanagan Boys' Town, where he claims he was abused for being Jewish. After going to school and graduating, he moved to the West Coast and adopted Christianity as his faith. By the 1960s, he was settled into Hollywood and he performed pop music under the names Mark Hoffman and later Marcus Abad. He committed several small petty crimes and was convicted of statutory rape. That means sex with a child. Burglary and theft, all before the age of 21. Tony was actually at a meeting with some advertisers in Los Angeles when he suddenly declares that God spoke to him and told him to preach that Jesus Christ is coming back to earth. If you want to know exactly how dramatic he gets for this, You'll have to find the documentary. He legitimately, froze up, twitched, jerked around, stiffened up again, stuff like that. Keep in mind, at this point in his life, he was not particularly religious. And he was also told by God that if you don't repent, you'd burn in hell. Standard Christian rhetoric, actually. Nothing cultish. Just, an odd person for God to choose, in my opinion. But hey, I'm not God, so I have no idea what his plan was. During this time, he also pretended to be a music promoter. He would claim to help someone become famous, make money off their small-time gigs, and run away with all their money and pay them nothing. Well, while he was in Hollywood, he found two beautiful blondes at a diner. One a mother, and the other a daughter. Those two were, of course, Edith and Chris. He walked right up, sat down with them, and began to brag that he could make them famous. Eventually, he goes to the bathroom, and the two decide to discuss him while he's gone. Chris tells her mother that she's heard of him. He's a known con man. Well, Edith liked Tony's confidence and style and knew that she could use it to her own advantage. So she looks at her daughter and says, "Make yourself scarce till tomorrow." Chris waits for him to come back, makes some excuse for herself, and vanishes into the very rainy night until the next day. Edith smiles at him and says something she's used to con others in the past. "Did you know Jesus Christ is coming back to earth again?" At this point, Tony's eyes go wide and he says, "How did you know?" Oh, Lord. She warned her mother that he was a con man, so she trusted her mom can handle herself till morning. During this time that her daughter's gone, Edith takes Tony back to her hotel and, of course, has sex with him because, of course. Yep, that's the kind of thing Chris was told to leave for, and she knew exactly what her mother was up to. After that, Edith and now Tony became inseparable. By the way, Chris did return fine. Everything was fine. She was not hurt while she was gone. The two divorced their spouses at the time and married each other in 1966. At that time, they became Susan and Tony Alamo. After 3 years, they founded the Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation. They also had a son who was raised basically as their golden child and almost a messiah. Yep, that sounds healthy for a kid. Good job. No, not at all. Now, on to the Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation. Now, this foundation's MO at first was very simple. They would find a group of hippies or lost souls and offer them the usual things all Christians say. They offered them a chance to save their souls and such. No, that is not cultish. Christian rhetorics and things, those are fine. Nothing of that is bad. What's wrong is they ask for all their money and possessions and things like that. The Alamos use the money to bring in more people and get more food for the hungry. Not that they spend that much on it, but that's how they get you in. The church's core belief was no drugs, no homosexuals, no adultery, the definition of which kind of gets a little complicated thanks to Tony later. No birth control, and no abortion. The members turned over all their money and property to the church. In exchange, they got all their basic needs met, and their children got free care and education as long as the parent was working. As always, it's God's will they work. Just for the record, I'm pretty sure if a parent stopped working, the children were given to someone in the cult who would work. They also believed Jesus couldn't return until the Arabs and the Jews made up and were companionable, to the point they made an arranged marriage between a Jewish and Arab member of the cult. Their child was deemed the peace child and was raised being called that. That is perfectly healthy for a child, I'm absolutely sure. Eventually, they had enough people to start a band and start performing for money. For the foundation and for God's glory, of course. Note, at this point, the members are being fed lies. And they mean what they say about being saved and everything. They just don't understand how they're being used. We don't blame them. They are victims at this point. In the Prophecy Digest, they took out an ad saying, "The sensational big band sound and gospel. Tony Alamo sings, accompanied by the Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation 80-piece orchestra and 150 voice choir. The image on the ad is of Susan and Tony smiling together, and in the background is the 150 choir members looking entirely too happy and cultish, actually. Yeah, if you ever look it up, it's super creepy. Eventually, they managed to make an entire compound where the followers and Alamo lived. The members would walk around Hollywood and ask for people to convert to Christianity. A little odd and pushy, but, honestly fine. Not cultish, just weird and pushy. Sometimes they'd find people who were just hungry and searching for food and a place to stay for the night. They would ask if they were hungry and wanted free food. The person would say, sure. They'd get them on a bus that took them an hour away to a church that offered food. If you worked. Then after you worked and ate and tried to leave, they'd berate you saying, they fed you, you owe them. And then by the time they stopped, it'd be dark. Time for sleep, more food, which now you owe them more money, so you need to work. And yeah, this is just a vicious little cycle that just kept going and going, so you never left. And keep in mind, they're also feeding them biblical texts and religious statements, and they're literally brainwashing them into believing that what they're doing is God's will. So by the time they even have a chance to leave, it's now their desire and will to stay there. And eventually, Susan wanted to go back to the South. So they made a church in Dyer, Arkansas. They began a new church and claimed it was a drug rehab facility. It was, in fact, just more Christian foundation. When they moved to Dyer, they actually opened up several businesses that ran a volunteer labor. Volunteer labor. Yeah, it's basically slave labor or sweatshops. They took out an ad that is just a photo of Tony and Susan, but it says, and I'm quoting it here, Tony and Susan Alamo welcome you to the Alamo Enterprises. The Alamo Enterprises on Highway 71 and Interstate 40 in Alma, Arkansas. The Alma restaurant has excellent home-cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinners where the superstars appear and dine, open 24 hours. The Alamo of Nashville in Alma, where superstars buy their clothes, open 9 a.m. to noon. Alamo Country Store and Fruit Stand has barbecue ribs, chicken beef, turkey, delicatessen, potato salad, coleslaw, cold cuts, picnic supplies, ice cream cones, and products, as well as a bakery. All grocery, clothing, and complete general store. Opened 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. The Alamo Care McGee gas super service station, full service and groceries, open 24 hours. The Alamo Bandito discount store. Hundreds of items less expensive than any store in a 1,500-mile area for new goods, open 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. The Alamo DX it sells gas diesel tires, excellent mechanics, open 24 hours. It's smart to shop all the Alamo Enterprises, best in quality, lowest in price, and the epitome of service. Okay, so I'm just saying that, of course, the prices were low. You're not paying your workers. Also, 3 of these buildings still exist. And one of them is a Taco Bell, which was the clothing store. The gas station's still a gas station, but a different name, different owner. And the Alamo DX is now a Sonic. Yeah, I actually looked up a map to figure out where these places were. Yep. They still kind of exist. You can go into Taco Bell and go, this was a clothing store. Also, I just thought I'd go ahead and add in that I actually know someone who went into these clothing stores. They didn't know it was a cult at the time. Forgive them. It was actually my stepdad. He states that the boots and everything were of fabulous quality because they were mostly known for their boots and they did like denim jackets that they decorated, and these jackets were worn by stars, and I'm not joking, these things, like regular denim jackets, sold for hundreds. Now it would go for over 1,000 in our time. And by volunteer labor, I mean their workers were making the boots and decorating those denim jackets and selling them unpaid. Yeah, they had them convinced they owed the Alamos, and with constantly being told God saved them and this is the right way to to be saved and to pay them back, and this is doing what God wants. That's how they all got brainwashed and stuck, and now they're just doing free labor. In 1973, the Great Bend Tribune made an article about the compound. Technically, it was actually about several different Christian organizations at the time because cults ran rampant at this time. You have no idea how rampant. This one is called Free Our Sons and Daughters from the Children of God, or FreeCog. One commune, I believe that was Tony Alamo commune, has filed a $1.1 million libel and slander action suit against the FreeCog parents. It goes on to say that cult leaders deny the youths cannot go home, even though the parents are saying they can't go home. I don't know. The cult is cited as saying, "We don't agree with the Catholic Church, but we certainly wouldn't take someone from there and lock them inside here," said Susan Alamo specifically, who with husband Tony Alamo operates independent Tony and Susan Alamo Christian Foundation near Saugus, a small town north of LA. "There are still laws in this country," Susan said. "There are no bars on our windows. These kids can come and go, and they do." The article goes on to say that they wanted to interview the kids, but they could not. With the Alamos denying these claims that you can come in to view the kids, but still denying them the right to do so when they actually try to do it. It also says that it's asking, as for donations, Susan says, well, yeah, basically we believe in sharing, like in the book of Acts. Most kids don't have much, but some do have like cars and savings, and they can share it because what we're doing takes 100% commitment to Christ, and that youth's accepting it, but adults can't seem to accept that their kids are committing to something so big adults can't accept. It's a selfish love for the child, a kind of possessiveness. They find it hard to take second place to God. Okay, Susan, that is certainly an opinion you have. It's a garbage one, but it's certainly one you have, or had. Chris said she did help with the foundation's books and quit the group around 1971. "Because I couldn't play it anymore, people would say it must be wonderful being kin to mother, and I would see kids giving Susan baby food, money, and literally feeding their own kids garbage." So, yeah, Chris was admitting that people are giving all their money to her mom and not using it on their own kids. She left the group with her 2 kids, but not her husband, who actually remained behind at the cult. On October 24th of 1977, they made the news again. They do this a lot. Most of my sources are them making news. This time in The Voice, in an article titled, "Do They Have a Right to Be Weird?" In this article, they're just talking about how homey Alma was before they came along. And when they began to discuss it, they actually talked about how the finances were $46,745 reported in 1970, while in 1975, that figure was $1,290,000 in contributions alone. Apparently, the author stopped to get some gas in Alma and some corn nuts. I don't know why that was important. Apparently, and with it, he got a flyer that says, and I'm quoting here, "Tony and Susan Alamo preached Jesus Christ as the Savior that died on the cross for the sins of man. The Alamos have been accused of hypnotizing people, brainwashing them, of being criminals, thieves, and racketeers." The source is a little difficult to read as it was old when it was scanned in. But apparently the writer did attend a service, and the service started about 8 a.m. by the time it was over. He'd had some hymns, like he'd sang them with him, with the accompaniment of hand clapping and a 5-piece country rock band. Such hymns as one, "With to Jesus," substituted for the original "Place Where I Can Go and Tell My Secrets To," in that old Beach Boys song. It says towards the end there were 3 sermonettes, about 5 minutes each. One was given by a big jock who seemed to be getting a little gray behind the eyes. I don't know what that means. He said when he was in high school, he took up surfing. He said that, now this is his quote here, "I could be sitting in class and looking at the window. Just by the way the wind was blowing in the trees as well, I could tell how the waves were. And I just surfed. The only thing I really did in school was draw pictures of boards, and then I graduated in 66. I got into drugs, and I was into acid for about a year and a half. I was dropping acid. pretty steady till my brain shrunk down to about the size of a pea. And then one day I just got up and walked to my mother's bedroom and I said, I don't know who I am. Well, she didn't know what to say. She couldn't tell me was that Jesus was what my life was missing. Sorry for the strange language. Some of these are legitimately direct quotes from people. All his drugs are showing in that sentence because it was one big run-on. I actually typed up the punctuation and everything. It was one big run-on. He actually goes on to discuss the conservative leadership or the guardianship and the deprogrammers, saying that even in some cases, a curious mix of the police station and the members never making it to the motel where the parents and deprogrammers were waiting had disappeared instead. So apparently some of the police officers were in Alamo's pocket. And by that, he's saying that some people are trying to get their kids deprogrammed by having the police take them to a motel and meet with the parents and the deprogrammers. And Alamo's got the police in their pocket, so whenever they get shifted from one cop to the next to be sent off to this deprogramming station, instead the cop is just taking them right back to the foundation. So there's a big issue with getting kids out. It's actually really complicated because they make so much money off their followers that they are legitimately able to just pay off the cops. Yeah, due to the brainwashing I mentioned before with the constant work, praying. Yeah, they were praying when they weren't working and sleeping and drilling in that this is God's will. They legitimately need the deprogrammers to come back to normal. And no one method was actually decided on. So a deprogrammer could mean anything from kidnapping them to ice baths and locking them in a room to shock therapy to having the parents sit in a room while they're chained to the bed, telling them how much they love them. There's no set method on this. So yeah, I'm not saying that deprogramming is better than the cult. I'm not saying that the cult's better than deprogramming. I'm just saying they were brainwashed and this was their solution at the time. The Alamos actually ended up suing the deprogrammers and the police. That actually did manage to get the kids on to their family and the deprogrammers, and they sued them for $2 million in 1970s. The suit itself was brought on by the Alamo group on the grounds of conspiracy to violate civil rights. Parents had to have parental hearings. It says here that as the time of the article I was reading that they began early next month as of the time that the article itself was made. Yeah, it's that kind of fun time where parents are struggling to get their kids out of the cult because it's starting to make headway and news, and they're realizing that they're being cut off, and so they're trying to get their kid back just to get them to deprogram and come home and be normal. Easier said than done. In 1979, when news got out about how they basically ran sweatshops, they once again made the news, this time the New York Times, for their issues with the government with the foundation's finances because, unpaid labor is slavery and it's illegal in the United States. Has been for a long time. Susan is quoted as saying, "I am not a charismatic person. I am sort of a female Billy Sunday, if that is charismatic." After mentioning how Susan showed up in extravagant clothes and wearing expensive perfume to church, claiming she had a terminal case of cancer, she actually originally meant it for it to be a lie, but it actually happened. Her daughter Chris said, "My mother makes a fortune at these organizations. An absolute raving fortune." After leaving the group, Chris actually said, "You are told to get down on your knees and accept Jesus Christ," which is, I think, the most wonderful thing that could happen to anyone is fine. But unfortunately, you're not accepting Jesus Christ. You're accepting my mother. And that's another thing. Cults don't actually care about standardized religion. They want you to worship the heads, not the gods behind it. Almost always the Christian God, somehow. When I say that, I do mean that they claim it's the Christian God because, no. Some of them do claim other gods, but like the Christian God is always, whenever he comes up, it's always a butchering of the Bible, always. They never follow the Bible for this. Okay, let us continue then. Chris states in a telephone interview that she helped organize the foundation to give Tony and my mother an income. "I didn't anticipate it would get that big. Her timing was sensational." In response to these allegations from Chris, Susan Alamo said that her daughter's criticisms were the result of a childhood addiction to pills while trying to lose weight. I feel a sick person has been exploited by the media, Susan said. Chris came back and responded to that, and she said, and I am again quoting, I am fat, I confess. I have a roll around my middle. But I'm not a drug addict or a psychotic actress. For the tax-exempt foundation's financial affairs, Susan Alamo said there is no money. We turn right around and invest it in the foundation. According to forms filed with the IRS, contributions to the foundation rose from slightly more than $46,000 in 1970, as we said before, to $1.3 million in 1976, so even more from our previous number. The forms show that the Alamos drew almost no salaries in those years. The article also states that the Department of Labor has filed suit in federal court in Arkansas, charging that the Alamo Foundation violated laws requiring that it has a corporate involved in the interstate commerce and must pay minimum wage and overtime and keep certain records. Susan Alamo responded to this by saying, and this is to newspapers, none of your business. I don't have to prove I'm innocent. That doesn't sound like an innocent person to me, but okay. Lane Petrie, age 27, was an honors graduate at the University of Minnesota, traveling around the country to round out her education. Now, this is her words from here. As she put it, then she joined the Tony Alamo Foundation in 1973. I have never been on drugs, she said, but I believe the kids' stories. The worse sinners you are, the better testimony you have. I've worked in my profession. I had just finished school as an occupational therapist. They didn't want to let me. If you give it all up to God, your job, your family, that's what God demands. Time is short. The world is coming to an end. I was really eating it up. They said they had the truth, and I was looking for that. It was like a quicksand. Fine on the surface, but once you got into it, you could not get back out. No, as she pointed out, it's difficult to leave cults. In fact, her parents got her out of the foundation in 1976 under a court order of conservationship. I cannot say that, and had her deprogrammed. Again, we have no idea what that means for her. But Lane says I couldn't have left voluntarily. I had a family, but they made me think my parents were an influence of the devil. That is another way to maintain your hold on your followers and onto your cult, is to make them believe that the outside world is actually the problem. Well, in fact, it's you that's the problem. The news article continues to say that Miss Lane now lives in Tucson, Arizona, and works with, I'm not using that word. It's the bad word for special needs kids. No. Anyway, she works as an occupational therapist with them. The Alamo Foundation has done better in the past year, or the last year, as of this article, with several sets of parents who sought unsuccessfully to remove their children from the Arkansas compound. They're jealous, said Susan. There is no way that pastors are going to replace parents if the parents are what they're supposed to be. Oh, okay, well, that's a take. Yeah, that's this is direct quotes from the New York Times article published in January 21st of 1979. Yep. Oh, by the way, if you want to read any of these other articles or flyers I mentioned, they're on TonyAlamoNews.com. Yeah, I'm not sponsored. But good Lord, somebody put a lot of effort into this. Yeah, also, before now, Tony has abused Susan in the background physically while Susan was protecting their son, until she died in 1982. Yeah, that's not a thing now. He just abuses the son. Please keep that in mind. Also, around this time, Tony decided kids holding hands or kissing was a sin. Touching with any pleasure was a sin. Any. Hugging a friend and enjoying a nice, wholesome moment? Yep, now you're sinning because you took pleasure from it. He called it fornicating with the mind. All the kids were punished by 5 men with a paddle that says, spare the rod, spoil the child. Yep, that's what's going on. June 13th, 1983. People Weekly covered the siege of the Alamo Ministries compound. This included the following tidbits. Susan died of breast cancer on April 8, 1982. She came out saying that she had it and that the prayer would cure her. It did not. She was saying it would be a miracle that she would perform. She failed. He also stated, Alamo did, that it would be within 3 days, like Jesus. First off, she said that prayer would cure her cancer. It did not. He said prayer would cure her death. It did not. Her death shook the followers. She told him on her deathbed to disband the foundation, for he would just mess it up. Her words, not mine. He did not. He kept her body on display because as long as he had her body, he had her power, one source stated. He told them if their faith was good and they prayed and believed enough, she'd come back to life. And they believed him because they believed he was God's mouthpiece and their prophet. You bring her back. We can have her back, he said. Yeah, after several months of praying, it didn't work. Yeah, he said that it was their fault because their faith wasn't strong enough. There was literally a 24-hour rotation of people praying. These people would go to work, either running the shops or making the products, until they were half dead, and then they would go and pray until they were barely able to walk, and then they would go and pass out at home, asleep. But yeah, their faith is not strong enough, right? They're doing all of this for God, but their faith is not strong enough, right? So yeah, without her around, he began ordering members to beat and punish each other, and labor got more intensive. With the praying between and barely any sleep, they forced people to work at ages as young as 11 or so. These are the boys. Yeah, that's also when the jean jackets became popular and the work got worse. Tony bought full-page ads in newspapers from New York to LA to print his rambling manifesto attacks on the IRS, the Supreme Court, the ERA, in which he has referred to women as, and I am directly quoting him here, house pigs. He attacked homosexuals, the media, and the Department of Labor, which had one lawsuit against the foundation for non-payment of wages to volunteers because, of course, they didn't comply with the first one when they were ordered to they were actually ordered to pay them, but everyone was expected to give them the money directly. And when he paid them, they all gave him their money, so there was no point in paying them. According to that same article, it states that last summer, Alamonites around the country began actively recruiting unwed mothers, mostly young and poor, to come to Arkansas as part of Tony's anti-abortion campaign. This was and is the offer we pay. Their actual offer is that they will pay for the delivery of the child, prenatal care. They will also take the child, raise the child for you until they're an adult, educate the child, full expenses paid. Yeah, they're going to take care of everything shy of actually delivering the child. But yeah, you heard me correctly. They're taking mothers who need help and are desperate because they have a new baby and saying, hey, yeah, we got you. We'll take care of it. We got it. The child would be raised by the foundation itself or adopted by a foundation couple, or the mother would become a volunteer and work for nothing, of course. Or she could leave, but if she did, she might never be able to reclaim her child unless she came back, and then in 1 to 5 years she might be able to. If she finds a good husband and a happy family life, Tony has said they would hand the child back. Behold, the price of their help. Also, children were beaten for any misbehaving as it was deemed to have been caused by the devil in them. And if they moved too much during a beating, they earned more beatings to get more of the devil out of them, I guess. Yeah, that's the kind of culture we're in. The compound came under suspicion with Child Protective Services at one point. The police officer that actually was seizing the compound said, at first the state police captain said he would only send in officers with bulletproof vests in the Arkansas. Now, this is the Arkansas Assistant Attorney General, Robert Waldron. He went in with the police. It's a remote, secret place up there. There's only one way in and one way out. Tony has guards everywhere. This is his words, all right? Tough. Don't shit with me, guys. Or the guards. They will not reply to anyone unless Tony nods. No one talks except Tony. Tony had said there were at least 70 children there. There were none we could find. 17 little beds, 4 cribs, and 2 potty chairs. And 1 commode was the only thing that they were able to find. The only heat was from a wood-burning 55-gallon drum. We believed the women were to have their babies in Memphis. Then they would come back to Alma to be prophetized and sent to work. The woman gives the child to Tony at first. We thought it might have been a black market adoption racket. Now we think they're raising workers. That was from a police officer. Forgive me. It was his phrasing, not mine. Do you remember the Fritzl case when her dad was saying things like, she's in a cult and they don't allow children? Yeah, no, cults don't reject kids because you can raise them to believe in the cult. Yeah, that's what they're for. Only Heaven's Gate actually turned away kids, and honestly, I got to cover that one later. But again, most cults don't. The exact article also goes on to say that their missionaries can just walk the streets and walk up to drug addicts and hippies and say, why are you destroying your mind, your soul, and your body? We found that they were like sponges. They were ready to make decisions for religion, and that's how they got them. They found every weak group, from hippies to druggies to lonely women to women struggling with their kid, and they took them in, made them promises of food, shelter, religion, safety, help, all of it. And then, while they were there, they said, oh, to get those things, you have to work. And that's how they got them. Because, again, once you work, you take from them, and to take from them means you have to work more, and you're just kind of stuck. Because if you've even considered leaving, like I said before, someone would berate you about how bad you are for taking advantage, and that is how it is, and that you're leaving God. I don't know their rhetoric. I'm not a member of the cult. There's also an article in the Washington Times from May 25th, 1984, called Religion Today, that is just a supporter bashing the Catholic Church and likening them to the mafia. At one point, even straight up saying, because I actually read these words, they are one and the same. Or doesn't it make sense that they're one and the same? Yeah, no, I actually read this. It was insane to read. Throughout this entire episode, writing this script, I felt like I was being gaslit by a dead man, trying to sort through all of this. Oh, Lord. In March of 1986, the press Argus Courier even covered the Alamo, citing Tony as not legally divorced and citing cries of parents of cult members wanting their children to come home. To be honest, most of Tony's marriages are not legal, since he claims the Bible allows for polyamory marriages. Not only does the Bible not allow it, neither does the United States itself does not. This is where I felt like I was being gaslit, because I'm like, too many cults keep saying this, so I actually had my cousin, who is a minister, help me check. Yeah, no, it's never. Not in there in any positive light. In October 13, 1987, the Chicago Sun-Times ran a piece about one of Tony's members. A former member was forced to leave her children with the compound in Alamo when she ran. Afterwards, she tried to use the courts to get them back, but Tony claims her son, only 2 months old at the time, had left Alma, and he had no idea where he is. Yeah, that's right. He fucking lost a 2-month-old child. He also sits here and goes, oh, it has nothing to do with this ministry. As if a child going missing from this ministry on the campus of the ministry is not the church's problem. Excuse me, what? Excuse me, what? You took charge of this child. You would not let this child leave with its mother. And you're going to sit here and tell me that it is not the church's fault that you lost a child? The mother in this case was one of the unofficial marriages. Yes. Thankfully, this mother is an adult. Yes, that's important. And I'm pretty sure this is an anchor baby that he was holding on to try to get her to come back. He took advantage of her vulnerability, got her pregnant, and used the child to try to keep her there. So I'm pretty sure he knows exactly where his own 2-year-old son is. When she left, she said that Tony Alamo told her she had to sign a piece of paper turning over her children to another member of the church before she could leave. She knew it wasn't legal, but she signed it anyway because she had to get out, and then she knew they would be okay, so she could come back and get them, because they're not going to kill the kids. I think she said they'd be okay. Alamo states that this was not coerced. Does somebody need to define that word for him? I think they do. He claims she did it of her own free will. I think that word needs to be defined too, because you're holding her children hostage. She did win custody and eventually got her children back. This is during the time where, instead of abortions, the compound offered non-member pregnant women prenatal and postnatal care, as well as they take the child away and care for it, so you don't even need to worry. Again, instead of money, they'd ask them to work. I cannot emphasize this enough. Yeah. The article continues to say that in 1985, when the court tried to force him to pay the workers, he said that would violate their religious convictions. Yes, he says that in order to be paid would violate their religious freedom and convictions. Okay. So he was forced to pay them. But as I said before, they were just expected to hand over their money, and every single person did, because if you didn't, you were judged. And that doesn't sound like a big deal to some of you out there. Because for you, being judged is, oh, that's a weirdo. To them, it's, you're one of the outsiders. You're not faithful enough. You got worse food, more shit chores. They made your life worse for judging you. This was not just, yeah, this is not, oh, that's the person's weird. No, this was much worse than that. Also, I just wanted to point out that the carers for these kids, yeah, they are under orders to beat them more than I mentioned before, because I don't like to think about it. Yeah, there is rampant child abuse and neglect. Child care is a gross exaggeration. In March of 1988, Tony Alamo made the news again, this time in the LA Daily News. In a piece they ran, he claims that the two Orange County fathers who reported him and got the raid I mentioned before started, yeah, he claims they're not just trying to get their sons back from the commune, but were in fact trying to hurt his foundation. If you need to use the word commune, bad things are going on. And questions here are 4, 9, and 11 at the time the article ran. Okay, so they pulled out of the Arkansas compound when they were forced to sign over their small trucking business to Tony out of fear for their lives. This is the previously mentioned men. The foundation actually declared them divorced from their wives, and the women were married off to Tony Alamo's son. AIDS? Robert Miller, one of the men, said during the 16 years he was with Tony, he had been brainwashed into believing that anyone outside the foundation was sorry. I was misreading for a minute. Sorry, it was a devil, not the devil, a devil. Direct quote. Tony claims the brainwashing allegations are ridiculous. Again, that's a quote. And of course you'd say that, Tony, you're the one doing it. Tony Alamo goes on to say they talked about 35 of the church's members into joining them, convincing them that they were going to make money of their homes and feed their families, when all the time the boys, meaning the Miller brothers, were taking the money from their trucking business and putting it in their own bank accounts across the state. So you're mad because you lost 35 people to 2 dudes? He also states the Miller boys, his words, fled Arkansas after the foundation members began to investigate their business. He also denies the children were ever abused. That's ridiculous, Tony continues. People have been complimenting us on the loving atmosphere we raise our children in. Nope. Just know, Tony, we know better. He claims not to know why the Millers would say that children are being abusive or being abused. Gee, Tony, I wonder why. Betting there's bruises to back up what they said and nothing to back up what you say. I believe they're going to face judgment from God, he said. In the meantime, I'm going to go after them with all my force, because when you attack my church, you attack the house of the living God. Well, that was a fun article. I found several more similar things said during that year, by the way. Like in April of that year, it came out that he had a follower beat a 14-year-old boy. So says the Newhall Signal. And yes, he's having these kids beaten, as I mentioned before. The rest of the article, around the 1989 and 88 time, is focused around the fact that he's on the run from the FBI because of the raid, and they never found him. Without their leader, the Dyer compound lost several of its members. But not all of them. Good job to you guys that got out. There's this one article run by the LA Times about a mom who finally got to see her 2-year-old son. If you notice, the ones that get returned are all male children. Also, that's where we're getting a lot of these stories, is a lot of the male children telling us what happens to the kids. Yeah, that's not a good thing. He was found in an abandoned car, by the way, but was safely reunited with his mom. Yay! Yay for little victories! Okay, now we're going to go into the 1990s. Fair warning. In the mid-90s, he begins to take child brides. After his divorce from his adult wives, he begins to take multiple teenage girls to be his bride, anywhere from 15 to 8 fucking years old. That's your trigger warning. Let's have fun. Nothing about this is fun. So, the Dyer compound was raided, and the organization relocated once again. According to Tulsa World, Tulsa, Oklahoma, by the way, in February of 1991, no one in Dyer was upset they left at all. Like, at all. Because they looked down on everyone that was not in the cult, because, yeah, everyone. To the point they didn't talk to any of the outsiders besides trying to convert them. No one knew anything else about them at the time. The compound was up to 250 acres in Dyer and was seized by the U.S. Marshals. So I went to the U.S. Marshal Museum in Fort Smith, which is very close to Dyer, and didn't see this event. This seems important. Why was this not there? So they sold everything they found in order to pay back the suits against Tony. Yeah, a lot of people found out they had 1,000 of those very expensive, very nice jackets and began to ask, so when's that sale again? Because they wanted one. I mean, if you really want one, at least make sure that he won't profit from it, so sure. At the compound during this time, a crossbar that could only be lifted by a guard was in place. This is before the cops got there. They had guard dogs chained near the one entrance, and from the road all you can see was a large brick dormitory. Yep, that's right, they had a dormitory in there. Hidden by trees, the compound also had houses, another dormitory, a cafeteria, a school, and the mansion the Alamo was used. The houses were for his inner circle, the rest had dormitories, and yes, I said he had a fucking mansion. His houses were for his inner circle, and the peasants got the dormitories. And yes, he had a fucking mansion with all his little wives. And I mean little wives because they're girls. They're children. Ugh. Keep in mind, they'd been holding Susan's body hostage from her family all this time. They found her on this compound in a mausoleum, and she was given to her family to be laid to rest. I will later explain how they actually found it, because this compound is not raided until much, much later. Like after his arrest. So yeah, he's still on the run at this point, but according to the St. Petersburg Times, he was finally captured in Tampa, Florida, in his fancy-ass home there. He swears up and down in this article that he wasn't in hiding. No, never. He said he was framed and began spouting biblical references, such as, why did Jesus get held by federal officials and the Apostle Paul and everybody else who ever preached the true gospel? Bro, you gave like 2 examples. That's not everyone, that is 2 people. And your example is bullshit. So yeah, your argument's shit. I was raised Christian, so yes, I do understand Christianity, and I have no issue with it unless it goes batshit like this. When asked if he likens himself to Jesus, he said, I'm certainly saved by him. Possible, I guess. I don't claim to know who's forgiven and for what and when and why and who is saved. There's also a quote from a child saying that at 11 years old, he heard Tony order 4 male select sect members to beat him with a paddle 134 times. One child in one setting. Lovely. Other articles say the same thing, and that he was extradited to Arkansas for trial, so he was caught. In September of 1994, the Commercial Appeal ran a piece stating that his ex-wives testify against Tony Alamo and that he has been arrested in July of 1991. Even in jail in 1995, while being prosecuted, he still has visits from his ministry and children are brought to him. And he marries them. The other members would stand back with their back to him to block the guards, the POV of him, and the Tony would like make out and touch his wives. Because these are children. These are children. What? I can't even say it. He would also record sermons while in jail and send them to his compounds. Mostly it was him condemning the people he was speaking to and berating them. And again, they saw him as a prophet, so they believed him. One of the 12-year-olds, actually the sister to my source, had a nightmare after seeing Tony kissing his young wives in jail that she too was married to him. When pressed by Tony, she admitted the dream, and Tony decided to make it a reality. A 12-year-old who was 13-year-old at the time of the marriage. I am so sorry, Amy. I'm so sorry to you. I'm so sorry to your family. In his own words, when a woman reached puberty, she, according to God, should be able to be married. He says they should be able to be married at 13, 14, and 15 years old, and in some cases, if they've already menstruated, at 12. This man is repulsive. He's not the only one taking children brides, by the way. He's a gross, sick, fucking pedophile. Once he got out, he began to actually be married to them in all of the ways. The wife that was 12, he forced her to have sex with him after he got out of jail. And when he got done, he got up, told her, "Get up and clean this bed." She told him she didn't know how to because her mother always took care of laundry. She was so young, she didn't know how to do laundry yet. And he had raped her and made her a wife. And so he would be doing this repeatedly to her, to a child. Keep in mind, at this point in the story, he is 60 years old. Did he tell her mom about the marriage? Mm-mm. Because the mom isn't a strong enough Christian, his words. And she'd commit a sin by trying to take her away from Tony if the mother knew. This child has to live with the idea that if she ever tells her mom and her mom tries to save her, if she leaves, then she is either condemning herself or her mother. This child lived believing that if she left or told her mom and your mom helped her, that they would both go to hell. That is so fucked up. His wives were also beaten and forced to work around the house around the clock. One wife was laughing while talking to her cousin, as children do because she's a child, and someone told Tony that she was flirting with them, another one of the wives. He confronted her after the call and she denied it. And his jaw and fist clenched, and he accused her of calling God a liar, arguing with Tony. He began to punch her for it. Yes, he not only equated himself to God here, but beat his supposed wife with his fist. His child wife. He also dragged her by her hair and kicked her over and over and over. She thought he was going to kill her. Thankfully, he did not. Maybe thankfully. Some wives had to starve in enforced fasts. He broke their jaws and knocked their teeth out. These are just children being forced to starve so they'd be smaller. They couldn't even leave without risking their own souls and the souls of their family and mothers in hell. These poor children. Okay, so we know what happened to the boys, and we know what happened to the girls that were wives. What happened to the other girls? Well, I actually asked a former member of the cult, and this is what she said, and I'm quoting her here, so here we go. In the cult I grew up in, there were not many girls that were not married to an older man by the time they were 12. There was one girl in the cult that I grew up in that did not get married at 12, until like 12. She was actually like 14 or 15. She was considered an old maid because she had not been married off. During that time, she stayed with her parents and went to the cult school and did chores the same until she got married. Once a girl is married, that's when they are a woman, so they are meant to no more school. Women did things like cooking and cleaning and babysitting, etc. Not many young boys were married, definitely not any under the age of 21 that I can recall. All these young girls were forced to marry much older men, few younger than 35 or 45. The boys, once they turned anywhere from 14 to 16, they were sent to live in the men's dormitory. They were still allowed to finish school, but they also had learned how to work with the men in the cult, learning the different trades such as plumbing, roofing, landscaping, etc. So yeah, That's an inside look at the cult from someone who was in it. It is during August of 1998 that he finally admits where Susan's body is in Tulsa, and that's how they found it. He only did it to avoid jail time, according to LA Times. One of the runaway brides called the FBI in 2007. Again, the FBI had a reason to go after him. They found more former brides, and they had all crossed state lines. That made it go from state to federal level crime. Tony defended his multiple wives by saying polygamy is in the Bible and it is condoned by God. I have asked now 3 people who study the Bible regularly, all of different faiths, and have checked myself. Yeah, not any standard Bible allows that. No. One of the people asked, actually just graduated with a minister's degree, so yeah, no. He was arrested. Again. I actually remember this part. I remember seeing him on the news and going, Mom, what did he do? Mom did not want to talk about it. Tony's flock of loyal members began protesting for his release, saying he is a prophet and God's mouthpiece. Several of the protesters were arrested for contempt of court. I remember that. In 2009, a judge had all the kids removed, and parents were told to either move off the church grounds and start a normal lives or never see your kids again. During the same year, the men who were named by the kids as the ones who beat them on Tony's orders were arrested and charged with child abuse. After his first defense attorney failed him, he got an upgrade to one who previously fought allegations of, this is for one person, satanic rituals, secret rooms, and mass molestations of children, and the client was able to get off scot-free because of this lawyer. You know what? If you got to pick one, Tony, I really wish you'd pick worse, but sure. About 1 month later, he decided one was not enough and got himself a second one. During that same month, the Alamo ministry sued the state of Arkansas for seizing its children. The ministry states that the state officials were conducting a systematic, persistent, and continuous campaign of harassment and intimidation against the church over religious views. Alamo also states that the state officials created a deprogramming program that included, and I'm sorry, this is very radical of them, to watch TV and get vaccines. These parents whose children are in foster care are now faced with the awful choice and predicament of having to choose between their children and their God. This choice means that their immortal souls are in grave danger. This is someone's actual opinion of what's going on during this time. They genuinely believed this. After all the evidence, he was sentenced to 175 years in jail. Finally. But we're not done yet. Even after all of this, after their prophet was proven to be a child rapist, he still had loyal followers. The church was active. His brides ran off to family outside the cult and free of the cult, but the influences are not over yet. First off, he kept appealing his sentence, and his followers kept showing up and protesting his imprisonment. Still remember that. To be fair, I was 19 in 2009. And this is the only cult I'd ever heard of at the time, so I thought they were crazy. He was still sending videos to his loyal members and had them convinced it was God's prophet. In 2017, he died of blood poisoning in a prison. Good. Fizzle out, you old ass bastard. But his ministry survived. In fact, even though he died in 2017, there was flyers being handed out clear till COVID started in 2020. And by handed out, I mean they were left on cars at various Walmarts everywhere, from Alamo to Fort Smith and Van Buren. And I've actually traveled to these Walmarts, had flyers on my car while I went inside to get a gallon of milk, and it took me about 10 minutes. I call it getting Tony Alamo'd. That being said, as far as I know, their ministry was active clear till this year. I can't find any evidence they are still inactive, but they are very active, and I'm not 100% sure what they're up to, but I'm sure they're active. Upon further inspection, I was actually able to find that their website, and they are still active. Very much so. Nothing is stated after January 21st, 2020, so they might be active or inactive. I don't know how they communicate. They just might not update their website because they haven't updated since 2020 because, COVID. And that being said, they're still in Fort Smith. According to Google, they are open 24 hours a day, every day. And according to some of my coworkers, they still randomly go outside when they go shopping at Walmart and find a flyer or two. Guess they just don't hit my part of the parking lot when I go to Walmart. Oh well, if you happen to catch this video again later and the cover image has updated. That means somebody I know got a flyer and I'm posting a picture of it. We are also asking that you can follow us on Tumblr, actually, because I don't like most social media, but I have a Tumblr for death, murder, and mayhem under my name, Liliana Stargazer. And that is all I have for today. So thank you for listening. And as always, we honor the victims, not the criminals. In some cases, we honor the victims and their families who were brainwashed by the criminals. Don't join a cult, folks. Have a great night.